Here we go. Is the sound working? That's the main question. You can hear my coffee percolating. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Miglosh for the WDMA, searching the world for marketing news every day. And we're going to talk a little bit about printing today. So I know I have a lot of printers out there who follow the WDMA, and a lot of our members are printers. So I think you'll enjoy this. And we'll get to customer data a little bit at the end from Stephen Yu. But first, here's a story you may have missed. Probably did, unless you live in the Sacramento area. This is from the Modesto Bee editorial board. Modesto Bee. Anyway, apparently one of the clients of AB, let's see what the name of the printer is, ABS Direct, who did a print job for the county assessor's office, inadvertently put, and it's hard to see here, but it's right here, inadvertently put "Let's Go Brandon" on there. And we're not going to get into that. If you don't know what that is, find a different news channel. But what it looks like to me, they stamped that on 544 letters that they processed for the county assessor's office. So it was a government communication, and apparently some people complained about it. I think what happened, we have a postage machine, and this is a stamped indicia, right, for first class, pre-sorted first class. And one of the upgrades to our postage machine was that you could put a slogan or a corporate message or something in there. And my guess is that this is from the previous job they ran, and that can happen. I sold printing for a couple of years, and I remember we had a job. I was always selling stuff that the printing company couldn't really produce, and one of the jobs was a three-color return address logo on some envelopes. And we were doing them on a one-color multilith and running them through 3 times to try to get the 3 colors lined up right. But there was a lot of slop in those little duplicators. And so, we sent it to the client. They didn't like it. We did it again. They didn't like it. So the third time, the press operator just stood there and watched them go. And if they ever got out of registration a little bit, he would stop the press and start it again and run it until all of them were perfect. So we sent them off to the customer. Only one thing wrong. In focusing so much attention on that indicia, he printed all the envelopes upside down. I don't know how we ever did finish that job. Sometimes I just pushed them too hard, as you might guess. So anyway, I sympathize a lot with ABS Direct, and that's the news anyway. And now, whoops, there was another story I wanted to get in here. Here we go. Okay, R.R. Donnelley reports double-digit sales and EBITDA gains, and that's pretty good. I get a little confused about who R.R. Donnelley is. RRD, I guess we're not supposed to call him R.R. Donnelley anymore. But, good, because they were like bankrupt a couple of months ago, just a little, like 2 years ago. So it's good to hear that they're doing okay. Okay, the next thing, let's see. We got to adjust some stuff here. Okay, this was a really interesting article from the UK. The Commonwealth Games. There's a opening ceremony for the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, England, I guess. And one of the floats in the parade, how about this? One of the floats in the parade was a giant printing press dedicated to the work of John Baskerville, who's famous for the Baskerville type font, right? Another of the floats, this is Bookworm Samuel Johnson, who is also from Birmingham. And there was also an allusion in one of the presentations to the 1879 fire where the Central Library burned down with most of its huge collection of Shakespeare works destroyed as a result. And apparently William Shakespeare was from Birmingham, so now you know that. But I just think it's, ducky that they would put a printing press in the center stage of their sports game celebration, which is awesome. We have a great, rich print heritage. Some say print changed the world. Probably true. The printing press. Right? Okay. Physical books are still king, but sustainability is a priority, from Dominic Bernard. And the first part of the article is excellent. Consumers overwhelmingly prefer books printed on physical media. For some reason, this entire article is barely mentions the word paper. Physical books, physical books, physical books. It's paper. What's the problem with the word paper? I don't know. Real books? Okay. Well, anyway, so they surveyed physical media. So they surveyed a bunch of people who bought ebooks and audiobooks and physical books, and 2/3 of them said, well, they really did like physical books the best. I don't know what the proportion of the buyers was, which is really the question. I buy all of those categories. Although mostly I listen to LibriVox, which is free audiobooks. And I just finished The Count de Monte Cristo. 52 hours of audio. It took a little while. It was quite the adventure. Okay. But anyway, then and then the article switches gears to Lisa Faratro, who is the Director of Environment and Sustainability at Book Printers CPI Group. Now, I did a show, it could have been a year ago, on a kind of paper that was built mainly with calcium and latex and very little wood pulp in it. And I was thinking I could pull that stuff out, but I'm not exactly sure where I put it. It felt a little slippery. It felt more like, European papers are coated with latex more than they are with clay, whereas in the United States, if we have a coated stock, it's more of a clay feel. And so European papers tend to feel a little bit slippery. And this had that feel to it. But apparently it's much less expensive to build a paper mill to make this calcium-based paper than it is to do paper pulp, paper produced by pulp. But anyway, I started thinking about this, and I said, I hold 2 patents for recycled cement, and we were able to take able to take a material that's being put in landfills by millions of tons a year and turn it into cement. And it was based on the Roman formula for cement, which has been lost to history. And it was about twice as strong as regular cement. And even got certified and all the rest. But anyway, what cement producers, that's one of the 3rd largest forms of carbon emissions if you're against those. And so this would dramatically reduce the carbon footprint of concrete. But anyway, the number one man-made product on the face of the earth. And so what they argue is they put up a lot of CO2 when they calcify the limestone, but it comes back from the air as cement cures, as concrete cures. And what's weird about this, the rest of the article, they should contact Kathy Rosie, who is director or president of Two Sides North America, because I think she would argue. I'd like to hear this conversation between Lisa and Kathy, because to me, when you produce paper, you're cutting down a tree that's absorbed CO2 from the atmosphere. I mean, what do they do? What they said, the only way to really get carbon neutral in printing is to buy carbon offsets, which is like plant more trees. Well, that's what the paper industry does all day long, is plant more trees. It's a peculiar perspective here, because what happens is, okay, so now you cut the tree down that's been harvesting the CO2, and you pack that CO2 into a book, and now you have a carbon sink, because a book has value. It's given value to that carbon, so it's not just going to get thrown in the landfill and eventually decompose and go back to the atmosphere. No, it's going to be saved and cherished for hundreds of years possibly, right? Like that library in Birmingham. And so if anything is sustainable, I mean, we plant trees and we harvest the trees. You know, when we mistakenly subsidize all this corn production to produce ethanol for our cars, we said, well, this is, instead of pulling the carbon out of the ground and putting it into the air where it came from in the first place, never mind, we're taking it from the air, putting it in our gas tank, and then putting it back in the air. So it's a cycle. Well, this is one of the few places in the world where we take carbon and we add value, take it out of the air, we add value, and then we store it on our bookshelves. It's a carbon sink. So you've completely lost me on that one. Let's get over to the data value. Okay, this is from Stephen Yu, and Stephen and I almost always track down the same path on almost everything. And what's interesting is that he gives us a hierarchy of what you should. First, you should have a goal. You should have rapid development. Okay, and I found that out. I spent about 3 months not really working on the spec, but I was working with the Hudson Bay Company in Canada on a data spec that one of the big accounting firms was hired to build. And they paid me to come up and sit in the sessions and listen to what the marketing people said they wanted. And it took months, and the output report was about this thick. And they sent me the output report, and they said, would you read it? We'll pay you to read it. And I called them back and I said, I can't read this. I've thumbed through it. I can bill you for a half an hour or something, but I'm not going to read this thing. And John up there said, well, why not? Why won't you read it? And I said, John, what you got here is an Eiffel Tower. And he said, what do you mean an Eiffel Tower? I said, well, you wanted a bridge from here to there, and you got something that looks a lot like a bridge, especially on paper. And you'll build it like a bridge, but it'll never get you where you want to go. And he said, that's what I thought too. He said, can you build it? And I said, yeah. And we did. That was our first really, really big project. We stuffed 250 million transactions into a Pentium. And they didn't build, the biggest drive you could buy at the time was a 1 gig drive. And so we had like 32 1 gig drives paper clipped around the chassis of this Pentium. And we made database history in that project. But the point is, you don't just say, well, we want everything we can think of. And we slimmed that process down to about, someone asked me the other day, well, if we wanted you to build a database, how long would you take? And I said, well, I would say it'll take us about 2 weeks of work, and you could say 4 weeks. So if you've been working on a database project, I've had prospective clients work 6 years on stuff we could build in 6 weeks because they don't know what they're doing. So the first step is know what you're doing. And I would say you're better off building something with a clear purpose that segments your customers and allows you to understand different offers than you are doing almost anything else. And if you've never done mail, I would say mail is the best foundation for that process. And I would encourage a company, if they want to understand their customers, not only to build a customer database, but to actually use the database to produce mailings and test offers and segments. And That's my editorial here. So Stephen again and I agree. The most important is the who. Who is your customer? You got to have a more or less clean name, address, zip code, phone number, various IDs. Then you want transaction data. Now, by transaction data, it sounds like Stephen says what he's talking about is a purchase history, which oftentimes is a set of summary variables like recency, frequency, monetary. And so you have, oftentimes in the customer master, an ERP system, an order processing system will have the most recent order date, the total number of times a customer's placed an order, and the total dollars that they've spent or that the orders add up to. But we find that to be somewhat inadequate. And so he says transaction data is potent, but you don't have it for prospects, and that's true. But there's ways to leverage the customer data and use it to profile the prospects. We'll talk about that for a second. But that aside, the item information, and see what most order processing systems do, because you might place one order and you might have 10 items on that order, is there'll be an order header and there'll be order detail lines, lots of detail lines. We take some of the elements of the order header, like the customer ID, the zip code, or whatever the the ship to address, but only just usually we just take the zip code because we use a lot of modeling data around postal code, and often more times than not, the 3-digit postal code is more effective as a modeling variable than the 5-digit, or in Canada 6-digit, and the household level is just noise. It's literally noise. And you pay a lot for adding that data. But what we do is we take that, I don't know if I want to get into all this, but we basically, yes, we use every item because, Stephen didn't get into the variables to build, but sometimes we want to look at a customer at purchase history one direction through the order items, and another time will come another direction. What's an example? Well, an example might be in Baseball Express, which we worked with for 10 years, took them 10 times, grew them 10 times bigger in that period. I called them up one time. I said, "Do you ever think of doing some business-to-business marketing?" They said, "No, we're strictly consumer." I said, "Well, who buys these $4,000 pitching machines?" They said, "Oh, leagues and colleges and even major league teams." I said, "Did you ever consider that business to business?" They said, "No, we're strictly consumer." Well, anyway, so we started looking at who bought those pitching machines and what else they bought. And it turned out that even if somebody didn't buy, that people who bought those pitching machines often bought line chalk and rosin bags, which is for pitchers. But it's a serious product that you don't use in backyard games, right? Nobody uses a rosin bag because they can't throw a pitch that hard, and we usually, just not what we were doing. And so, and we were throwing, tin cans and pieces of wood and stuff around for bases. So we found that that the field items, even the inexpensive field items, meant that you had a serious ball diamond, and you maybe needed uniforms, you maybe needed, there's all kinds of stuff you could need. And so then we started outbound telemarketing to them, and we actually ended up with a field sales force, and that created a multi-million-dollar business just in a year or two. And so the way we identified the business to business is we created a special view of the items, and we only looked for those items that we had decided indicated a field was there, right? And so we had our regular categories: bats, balls, gloves, and we had a whole nother separate analysis for B2B versus consumer. And you can do that if you have the SKU level data. Okay, transaction channel often rides along with that stuff. Response history, I've never had a client who actually wanted us to put all this in, because the idea is that you put every instance of mailing. There's a way to summarize it in much the same way that we summarize transactions, but we won't get into that. One of the things, though, that's helped us a lot is geodemographic census data. You can create variables, simple variables, that help with understanding when a customer's only bought once, hasn't bought lately, and didn't spend much, and that's about half your customers on any decent database. What do? Well, one way to look at it is, where do they live? What kind of neighborhood are they from? And when you get that data and you model it with the machine learning, then you can apply that to your prospect list. And it's not the kind of thing where you want to select list by it, but if you're using response lists, which I've talked about earlier in the week, you say, well, this list is really, really good. Well, leave it alone. This list makes us money prospecting. This list doesn't make us money, but it's like break even. Well, maybe we should drop out just the bottom third of neighborhoods that are least likely to respond. For Baseball Express, we actually created a baseball propensity variable where we took the membership of the American Softball Association. This was for another project, but we built a softball variable. We said, okay, how many members are there in a zip code, and what's the population of the zip code? And we got the baseball players per capita per zip code, and that had some predictive force because there are hotspots for softball. There's hotspots for hardball. We did that later, and so if you had one catalog left and you were just prospecting with it, you had a list that was some good but not great. Who would you send it to? Would you send it to somebody where nobody plays softball or where a lot of people play softball? Usually it works where a lot of people play softball. I mean, we found that out. With Cabela's, we did the same thing with fishing stores, and we thought that Cabela's would be great where there were fewer fishing stores, but it turned out, nope. The more fishing stores, the better Cabela's did. So same thing with pet stores. We did another analysis for another client where we create these weird variables. But anyway, so you can create weird geodemographic variables from available data. I would say that's probably better than most online data because your neighborhood is much more fixed than your click behavior of any given moment. But anyway, lots of online, anyway, sentiment data. Anyway, so if you'd like to know more, give Stephen a call or give me a call. And this article will be down on WDMA.org right after the show. Have a great day. Like and share. Your friends will know you're smart. And you can listen at double speed. I try to speak clearly